chapel was cloaked in a heavy silence, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes every breath feel like a struggle. It was the silence that follows the end of a life, a silence so profound that it seems to absorb every sound, every whispered prayer, every stifled sob. Soft beams of pale sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting fractured rainbows on the polished wooden pews, their colors dancing faintly on the faces of those gathered. The air was thick, with the scent of lilies and roses, delicately arranged blossoms chosen with care to honor a man who had been the very heart of this family. Now, he lay peacefully beneath the polished oak casket resting solemnly at the front of the chapel, a silent testament to a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and memories. I sat there, my hands trembling slightly, clutching a folded handkerchief that had once belonged to my husband. The fabric was worn and softened from years of use, yet it still carried the faint, comforting scent of his cologne, an invisible thread that tethered me to the man I had loved for over 40 years. Around me, faces blurred into a sea of muted black and white, all bowed heads and quiet tears, each person lost in their own grief. But inside me, my heart was a storm of grief and disbelief, swirling with a pain so raw and fierce it felt as though it might tear me apart from the inside out. And then, amid the hushed sobs and whispered condolences, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps retreating, hurried and deliberate. My head turned slowly, almost mechanically, and my eyes caught the figure of my son slipping out of the chapel. His face was tight, drawn with something I couldn't quite place. Was it guilt? Anxiety? Or something colder? Confusion flickered through me like a sudden chill. Why was he leaving now? The funeral had barely begun. Wasn't this the moment to stand by family, to honor the man who had given us so much? Later, the painful truth reached me like a cruel gust of wind. My son had chosen to celebrate his wife's birthday that very day, instead of staying for his father's funeral. This whole story will shake you, so take a moment and hit that subscribe button. It will help me a lot. And comment your story in comment section. I would love hearing from you. So, the words hit me like a physical blow. Sharp, unforgiving. His wife's birthday. The day we were supposed to mourn, to honor the man who had been my rock, the pillar of our family, his grandfather's legacy, was overshadowed by a party, an event that could have waited. But to me, it felt like a betrayal so deep, so cutting. It sliced through my very soul. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to steady my ragged breathing. The chapel remained filled with the soft rustle of tissues and the occasional sniffle. But inside, I was unraveling, thread by thread. How could he choose a celebration over his own father's final goodbye? Was I invisible to him now? Was the love and respect I had given him all these years so easily discarded, replaced by indifference? The casket creaked as the funeral director gently closed the lid, the sound echoing in the stillness like a final punctuation mark on a chapter I never wanted to end. The weight of it was more than just wood and metal. It felt like the crushing weight of loss, of endings, and of countless things left unsaid, unspoken, and undone. Instinctively, I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold surface as if I could hold on to him just a little longer, defying the cruel finality of death. Tears welled up, blurring my vision and spilling down my cheeks. Around me, the congregation began to rise, preparing to leave, but my world had stopped moving. Time seemed to freeze, trapping me in a moment of unbearable grief. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw her, my daughter-in-law. She stood apart from the others, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, lips pressed into a thin, hard line. There was no sadness in her eyes, no sign of the grief that should have been there on such a day. Instead, there was a coldness, a dismissiveness that made my heart ache in a different, sharper way, like a wound that refused to heal. She glanced at me briefly, her expression unreadable, a flicker of something like disdain or indifference passing over her face. Then she turned away. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished floor, each step echoing like a harsh reminder as she exited the chapel, leaving behind a silence heavier than before. It was a small moment, almost imperceptible to anyone else in the chapel, but to me, it was the first crack in the fragile facade of family unity that I had clung to for so long. A subtle shift in the air, a glance exchanged, a silent message, conveyed without words. These tiny fractures began to reveal the truth beneath the surface. I wanted so desperately to call out to my son, to reach across the gulf that had opened between us and ask him why he was letting her overshadow this sacred day. Why he wasn't here with me, with his father, in this moment that should have bound us together. But the words stuck in my throat, tangled and caught like a knot, suffocated by the sobs that threatened to escape and betray the composure I was desperately trying to maintain. The funeral procession moved forward, slow and solemn, the priest's voice soft and steady, as he recited prayers for the departed. I clung to those words, grasping at the ritual as if it were a lifeline, a way to anchor myself amid the swirling storm of emotions. But my mind was elsewhere, haunted by the vivid, painful image of my son choosing a party over a funeral, by the coldness etched into the face of the woman who had taken his side, and by extension, turned her back on me and the family we once were. As the service drew to a close, I found myself glancing toward the pew where my son should have been sitting. The space was empty, cavernous, a void that echoed louder than any words ever could. The absence was deafening. I sat frozen in my seat, the weight of abandonment settling over me like a heavy, suffocating shroud. It was as if the very ground beneath me had shifted, leaving me unmoored and alone in a sea of grief. Outside, the sun was beginning its slow descent behind the towering trees, casting long, stretching shadows over the cemetery. The mourners gathered around the gravesite, their faces etched with sorrow and sympathy, their eyes heavy with the shared pain of loss. I rose slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me, and approached the grave with a heart weighed down by sorrow and disbelief. The earth was freshly turned, dark and rich, a stark contrast to the pale flowers that adorned the casket. I knelt beside the grave, my fingers trembling as they traced the name etched deeply into the cold granite. My husband's name, forever engraved in stone, a permanent reminder of a love that death could not erase. I whispered a farewell, my voice barely audible over the gentle rustling of leaves in the soft breeze. Goodbye, my love. I'll carry you with me, always. The words felt fragile, like a fragile thread connecting me to him across the divide of life and death. But even as I spoke, a part of me was breaking, not just from the unbearable grief of losing my husband, but from the dawning realization that the family I had known and cherished was changing, fracturing in ways I had never imagined. The bonds that once held us together were unraveling, pulled apart by choices and loyalties that left me standing, alone. Later that evening, as I sat alone in the quiet house that once echoed with laughter and warmth, the absence of my son and his wife was a hollow ache that filled every corner. The silence was deafening, pressing in on me from all sides. I found myself replaying the day over and over, the sound of the casket closing, the scent of the flowers, the empty pew where my son should have been, and that cold, dismissive glance from my daughter-in-law. Each memory was a fresh wound, a reminder of the distance that had grown between us. It was then, in the stillness of that lonely night, that the seed of a painful realization took root deep within my heart. I was no longer the center of this family's world. My son's loyalty had shifted away from me, and with it, my place in their lives had been diminished, pushed aside like an unwelcome shadow. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered into the empty room, my voice trembling with heartbreak and disbelief. How could they choose a birthday over a funeral? How could they forget what this day meant? The grief was suffocating, a heavy weight that threatened to crush me beneath its relentless pressure. Yet, beneath the overwhelming sorrow, something else was stirring. A quiet fire, a small ember, of resolve that refused to be extinguished. It flickered within me, fragile but persistent, a promise that I would not be broken by this betrayal. This ember was the beginning of a new strength, a determination to reclaim my place, to fight for the family and the love that had been so callously cast aside. Because love, respect, and family are not just about blood or tradition. They are about honor, loyalty, and standing by each other when it matters most. These are the values my husband and I had built our lives upon, the very foundation of our family. But if my son and his wife could not understand that simple truth, then I knew I would have to find a way to make them see. It was not just for myself, but for the memory of the man who had been the heart of our family, and for the legacy of love and respect he had left behind. The days following my husband's funeral unfolded like a slow, painful unraveling of everything. I thought I knew about my family. The house, which had once been a warm refuge, filled with the echoes of laughter, love, and shared memories, now felt cold and foreign, as if the very walls had turned against me. Each room was steeped in memories of him. His favorite armchair by the window where he used to sit every morning, reading the newspaper bathed in soft sunlight, the worn-out slippers resting faithfully beside the hearth, never left unused, and the faded photographs that lined the mantelpiece, capturing moments of joy, milestones, and togetherness that had once defined our lives. But those cherished tokens of our life together were beginning to vanish, quietly and relentlessly, replaced by an unsettling emptiness that gnawed at my heart like a persistent ache that refused to fade. At first, I clung desperately to the familiar routines that had kept us grounded for decades. I cooked the meals he loved, the ones that once filled the house with comforting aromas and brought back memories of happier times. I tended the garden with the same care he had taught me, nurturing the flowers and plants that had been his pride and joy, hoping that their blooms would somehow bring life back into the hollow spaces. I kept the house as neat and welcoming as ever, believing that maintaining the physical space might preserve the warmth and love that once filled it. But no matter how much effort I poured into sustaining the life we had built together, the warmth I once felt seemed to slip through my fingers like grains of sand, fragile, elusive, impossible to hold on to. The family gatherings that used to bring joy and comfort transformed into minefields of cold stares and whispered conversations from which I was increasingly excluded. Invitations arrived late, or sometimes not at all. And when I did attend, I was met with polite nods and distant smiles, as if I were a stranger rather than a mother or grandmother. The most painful part was the growing distance between me and my son's wife. Once cordial and even friendly, she now treated me with a barely concealed disdain. At family dinners, she would avoid eye contact, speak over me, or swiftly change the subject whenever I tried to share a memory of my husband or express my feelings. It was as if an invisible, impenetrable barrier had been erected between us, one I was not permitted to cross. I remember one particular Sunday evening when my son's family came over for dinner. I had spent hours preparing his favorite dishes, hoping to bridge the widening gap between us, to remind them of the love and care that still existed beneath the hurt and betrayal. But as I entered the dining room, I found them already seated around the table, my son and his wife whispering, quietly, their eyes flickering toward me with a mixture of discomfort and impatience. "Mom," my son said, his voice strained and distant. "We're just about to start. Maybe you can join us later?" The words hit me like a slap, cold, sharp, and cutting deep. I nodded silently, swallowing the lump in my throat, and retreated to the kitchen. The sound of laughter and clinking cutlery from the dining room was a cruel reminder of my exclusion, echoing through the house like a painful reminder that I no longer belonged. It wasn't just dinners. Decisions about the house, the estate, and even small family matters were made without my input. Invitations to family events came with caveats or were filtered through my daughter-in-law, who seemed to control every detail with an iron grip. I was no longer a voice that mattered. I was a shadow on the sidelines, watching as my family moved on without me, leaving me behind in a silence that screamed louder than any words. The most heartbreaking moments were the subtle, almost imperceptible erasures of my husband's memory. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find the mantelpiece rearranged. The framed photographs of my husband and me, which had stood there for decades as silent witnesses to our life together, were gone. In their place were new pictures. My son and his wife, smiling and radiant, as if to rewrite the history of our family and erase the past. I reached out to touch the empty space where the photos had hung, my fingers tracing the outline as if I could feel the ghost of their presence lingering in the air. It was a wound, fresh and raw, a silent declaration that my husband's memory was being pushed aside, replaced by a new narrative that excluded me and everything we had shared. The changes didn't stop there. His favorite armchair had been moved to the attic, his books removed from the shelves, and the familiar scent of his pipe tobacco had vanished, replaced by the sharp smell of cleaning products and new paint. The house was being transformed, reshaped, to fit the desires of my son and his wife, a place where I no longer belonged. I remember standing in the hallway one evening, staring at the walls that had witnessed decades of our life together. I could almost hear his voice, soft and comforting, telling me everything would be all right, but the silence that answered was deafening. The loneliness wrapped around me like a heavy cloak, suffocating and relentless. I felt invisible, cast aside by the very people I had nurtured and loved. My son, the boy I had raised with so much hope and sacrifice, now seemed like a stranger. His loyalty shifted, his heart no longer mine to hold. I thought back to the years I had devoted to this family, the sleepless nights caring for my husband during his illness, the sacrifices I made to ensure my son had every opportunity, the love I poured into every moment. And now, it felt as if all of that was forgotten, replaced by cold indifference and calculated distance. Yet, amid the sorrow, a quiet voice inside me urged me to pay attention to the small details that didn't add up, to the unexplained changes that hinted at something more sinister beneath the surface. One afternoon, while tidying the study, I noticed a stack of papers tucked away behind a row of books. Curious, I pulled them out and my heart sank. Among the documents were letters and legal papers I had never seen before, some bearing my husband's name, others with my son's signature, but all unfamiliar and unsigned by me. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why had these papers been hidden? What decisions were being made without my knowledge or consent? Days later, I discovered that my husband's original will was missing from the safe where I had always kept it. Panic and suspicion gnawed at me. Had it been taken? Altered? I confronted my son gently, hoping for reassurance, but his evasive answers only deepened my fears. "It's all being handled," he said, avoiding my gaze. "You don't need to worry." But how could I not worry when everything I held dear was slipping away? The house itself seemed to turn against me. One morning I entered the kitchen to find my husband's favorite coffee mug replaced with a new set of cups, sterile and impersonal. The scent of his pipe tobacco was gone, replaced by the sharp smell of disinfectant. It was as if they were erasing not just his memory, but the very essence of our life together. Each day my heart broke a little more. The final blow came when I overheard a conversation between my son and his wife. Words that confirmed my worst fears. "She's just in the way now," I heard my daughter-in-law say, her voice cold and dismissive. "We need to move forward. Without her." My son didn't argue. He simply nodded. That night I lay awake, tears streaming down my face, wondering how the family I had built with so much love could turn into strangers so quickly. But amid the pain, a spark of clarity ignited. I realized that if I didn't stand up for myself, for my husband's memory, and for the truth, I would be lost, not just as a mother and widow, but as a person. The fractures in my family were deep, but they were not the end. I would find a way to fight back, to reclaim what was mine, to remind them that love, respect, and loyalty are not so easily discarded. The days of quiet sorrow and subtle exclusion had passed, replaced by a simmering unease that refused to be ignored. I had tried to hold on to hope, to believe that my son's absence at the funeral and the coldness of his wife were temporary, that grief had clouded their judgment. But the truth was becoming impossible to deny. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and it centered around what should have been the most sacred trust in our family, my husband's will. It began with a small, almost accidental discovery. One afternoon, while searching for a letter I wanted to reread, I opened the old wooden safe in my study, the one where my husband had always kept his most important papers. My fingers trembled as I reached inside, expecting to find the familiar leather-bound folder containing his will. But it wasn't there. The safe was nearly empty, save for a few scattered documents and some old photographs. A cold wave of panic washed over me. How could the will be missing? Had it been taken? Altered? I sat down heavily, my mind racing through every possibility. I thought of my son and his wife, their growing distance, their quiet control over the house and the family. Could they have done this? Could they have taken something so vital, so personal, and hidden it from me? I tried to push the fear aside, telling myself I must be mistaken, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with every passing day. I decided I could no longer sit in silence, haunted by doubts and fears that gnawed at my heart. I needed answers, reassurance that my worst suspicions were unfounded. One quiet evening, I found my son in the living room, his figure slouched on the couch, scrolling through his phone with a distracted air, seemingly detached from the world around him. The familiar warmth I once felt in his presence was replaced by a cold distance that made my chest tighten. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I gathered the courage to speak, my voice barely above a whisper. "Have you seen my husband's will? It's missing from the safe." His eyes flicked up to meet mine, but only briefly. Then, almost instinctively, he looked away, avoiding my gaze as if shielding some hidden truth. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his tone dismissive yet tinged with unease. "Everything's fine. The will is being handled by the lawyer." "But I haven't been told anything," I insisted, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and frustration. "I have a right to know what's happening. This is my husband's estate and I am his widow." He sighed heavily, a flicker of frustration flashing across his face, as if my questions were an unwelcome burden. "It's complicated," he murmured, almost pleading. "Just trust me, okay?" But trust felt like a fragile thread slipping through my fingers. The evasiveness in his eyes, the coldness in his voice, and the way his wife seemed to have taken control of every decision. All of it pointed to a betrayal I was only beginning to understand. I realized that I could no longer rely on him to protect my husband's legacy or my place in the family. Determined to uncover the truth, I reached out to an old family friend, Mrs. Kevin, a lawyer who had helped my husband with his affairs for many years. She was a kind woman, wise and patient, and I hoped she could guide me through the maze of legalities that now seemed to surround me like a dark fog. When I met Mrs. Kevin in her cozy office, the familiar scent of leather-bound books and polished wood brought a small measure of comfort amidst the storm of uncertainty. I poured out everything: the funeral, my son's absence, the missing will, and my growing fears that my husband's wishes were being ignored or deliberately concealed. Mrs. Kevin listened carefully, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully as she absorbed every detail. "It's not uncommon for families to face disputes over inheritance," she said gently, her voice steady and reassuring. "But the law is clear. If the original will is missing, our first step is to find a copy or any evidence that can confirm its contents. And if there's suspicion of forgery or undue influence, we have every right to challenge it in court." Her words gave me a flicker of hope, but they also brought a daunting sense of the battle ahead. I was no legal expert, no fighter by nature, but I knew I could not stand by and watch my family be torn apart by greed and deception. With Mrs. Kevin's guidance, I began gathering every scrap of evidence I could find. Old letters, photographs, bank statements, anything that could prove my husband's intentions and expose my son's neglect. One afternoon, while rummaging through a dusty box of papers tucked away in the attic, I found a folded envelope addressed to me in my husband's unmistakable handwriting. My hands shook as I carefully opened it, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Inside was a letter, dated just weeks before his death, expressing his wishes clearly and unequivocally, that I was to be the sole executor of his estate, and that his assets were to be divided fairly among the family, with no one excluded or disinherited without just cause. Tears blurred my vision as I clutched the fragile letter to my chest, feeling the warmth of my husband's love and fairness radiate through the delicate paper. It was more than just ink on parchment. It was a lifeline, a testament to the man I had loved for so many years and the principles he had lived by with unwavering integrity. Every word echoed his kindness, his sense of justice, and his desire to keep our family united and cared for. The letter was a tangible connection to him, a piece of his heart and soul that he had entrusted to me, and holding it close gave me a bittersweet comfort amid the storm of betrayal that was unfolding around me. Yet, as I held that precious letter, the sting of betrayal cut through my heart like a sharp knife, deeper and more painful than I had ever imagined. How could those closest to me, my own son and his wife, turn their backs on not only me but on the man whose memory I was sworn to protect? The pain was raw and relentless, a wound that seemed to open wider with each passing day. As the days passed, more unsettling truths began to surface, each one heavier than the last. I discovered that shortly after my husband's passing, my son and his wife had quietly visited a lawyer, presenting a new will, one that excluded me entirely and left everything to them. The signature on this document was suspiciously neat, almost too perfect, lacking the familiar imperfections that come with genuine handwriting. The circumstances surrounding its creation were murky and unexplained, filled with gaps and inconsistencies that made my heart ache with suspicion and dread. It became painfully clear that this was no mere oversight or misunderstanding. It was a calculated attempt to rewrite my husband's final wishes for their own gain, an act of betrayal that shook me to my core and threatened to unravel everything I had believed about family and loyalty. The realization that my son and his wife could conspire in such a way left me feeling isolated and vulnerable. Yet it also ignited a fierce determination within me to fight for what was right. Mrs. Kevin, my trusted lawyer and confidant, advised me to request a forensic examination of the will to verify its authenticity. The thought of challenging my own son in court was agonizing beyond words. It felt like tearing open a wound that might never heal, forcing me to confront not only legal battles, but the emotional devastation of family betrayal. But I steeled myself, knowing this fight was not just about money or possessions. It was about justice, respect, and preserving the legacy of the man I had loved and lost. I owed it to him, and to myself, to stand firm and seek the truth, no matter how painful the journey. Mrs. Kevin's calm confidence and unwavering support became a beacon of hope in the darkest moments, reminding me that I was not alone in this fight. The legal battle that followed was grueling beyond anything I had ever imagined. Each day felt like a test of endurance, not just of my willpower, but of my very soul. I faced cold stares from relatives who had already taken sides, their eyes filled with suspicion, judgment, or silent condemnation. Whispers trailed me wherever I went, rumors questioning my motives, insinuations that I was driven by greed or bitterness rather than a genuine quest for truth and justice. The crushing weight of fighting against my own blood pressed down on me relentlessly, threatening to break my spirit and crush my resolve. The courtroom became a battleground where love and loyalty were weaponized, and every word thus spoken felt like a blow to my heart. Yet through it all I remained calm and resolute, drawing strength from the quiet resilience my husband had always admired in me. It was that inner fortitude, that unwavering belief in what was right, that kept me moving forward even when the path seemed impossibly steep and lonely. I reminded myself that this battle was not just for me, but for the memory of my husband and the values we had shared. Mrs. Kevin became my anchor in the storm. Her steady presence, her patient explanations of every complex legal step, and her unwavering support gave me the confidence I so desperately needed. She prepared me meticulously for each court hearing, guiding me through the labyrinth of legal language and procedures, ensuring I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together we gathered witnesses, old friends, neighbors, and acquaintances who remembered my husband's kindness, his fairness, and his true intentions for his estate. Their heartfelt testimonies became powerful affirmations of the man I had loved and the justice I sought to uphold. Each witness's words were like threads weaving a tapestry of truth that slowly but surely began to unravel the lies and deceit surrounding the forged will. With every step, I felt a growing sense of hope that justice would prevail, that the legacy of love and fairness my husband left behind would be honored. One of the most difficult moments in this painful journey came when I had to confront my son directly in the courtroom. The man who once held my heart in his hands, the little boy I had raised with so much love and hope, now stood before me with a face hardened by anger and denial. His eyes, once warm and full of affection, were now cold and distant, devoid of the love and connection we had shared. It was as if a wall had been built between us, a barrier forged by betrayal and silence. But despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me, I stood tall. I did not respond with anger or bitterness. Instead, I carried myself with the quiet dignity of someone fighting for what was rightfully hers. Looking at him, I felt a surge of sorrow for the chasm that had grown between us, a deep ache for the son I had lost to greed and deception. But I did not waver. I knew that this fight was about more than just family. It was about justice, truth, and honoring the memory of the man who had been the foundation of our lives. When it was my turn to speak, I addressed the judge with a voice that was steady despite the tears that threatened to fall. "I am not here to cause pain," I said, my words measured and sincere. "I only ask that my husband's wishes be honored, that the truth be revealed, and that justice be served." The courtroom was thick with tension, every eye fixed on the unfolding drama. The air was heavy with anticipation, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Evidence was presented, testimonies were heard, and slowly, the truth began to emerge. From the shadows, the forged will was exposed, its deceit laid bare for all to see. The manipulations, the lies, the betrayal. It all came to light in that solemn room, stripping away the facade and revealing the painful reality beneath. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor, restoring the original will and reaffirming my role as executor. It was more than just a legal victory. It was a vindication of my husband's legacy and the principles he had lived by. As I left the courtroom, a wave of relief and exhaustion washed over me. The battle had been long and hard, filled with moments of doubt and despair. But I had won, not through anger or bitterness, but through calm determination and unwavering faith in what was right. It was a triumph of truth over deceit, of love over greed. That day marked a profound turning point in my life. I had faced betrayal and loss that cut deep. But I had also discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. I had reclaimed my place in the family, not just legally, but emotionally, and honored the love that had shaped us all. Though the wounds of the past would take time to heal, I knew deep in my heart that I would never again be silenced or sidelined. I was a mother, a widow, and a fighter, and I would protect what was mine with every ounce of my being, no matter the cost. The day of reckoning arrived with a quiet intensity that belied the storm raging inside me. For weeks I had gathered evidence, prepared my case, and steeled myself for the moment when I would stand face to face with the son who had once been my pride and joy, and the woman who had driven a wedge between us. Now, as I stood outside, the familiar house, the house that had once been filled with love and laughter, now shadowed by betrayal, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and resolve. The memories of happier times clashed with the harsh reality of what had become. The door before me was not just an entrance to a home. It was a threshold between the past I cherished and the painful truth I had to confront. Before I could even knock, the front door swung open. There they stood, my son, his face tight with tension, eyes flickering with a mix of anger and apprehension, and his wife, her gaze cold and calculating, as if daring me to challenge them. They had been expecting me, no doubt warned by whispers and rumors that I was coming to confront them. But nothing could have prepared them for the truth I was about to lay bare. The years of silence, the hidden lies, the stolen legacy, all would come crashing down in that moment. I stepped inside, my heart pounding fiercely, but my voice steady and clear. "We need to talk," I said simply, holding up the folder that contained the legal documents, the letters, the proof of forgery. everything that exposed their deception. The weight of the moment was heavy with unspoken words and years of hurt, but I was ready to face it all. I was ready to stand firm and demand the justice that had been denied for far too long. The room seemed to hold its breath as I began to speak, the air thick with tension and the promise of reckoning. My son's wife sneered, crossing her arms. "What's this, then? Another one of your dramatics?" I ignored her, turning my gaze to my son. "This is the truth," I said. "The truth about the will, about the inheritance, about everything you've tried to hide." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "Mom, please, this isn't the time." "No," I said firmly. "It is the time. It's past time you faced what you've done." I opened the folder and spread the documents on the dining table. The forged will, the letters from my husband, the testimony from witnesses, all laid out like a map of betrayal. "This," I said, pointing to the forged will, "is not my husband's last wish. It's a lie, created to cut me out and give everything to you." His wife laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think this changes anything? You're just an old woman clinging to the past." The words stung, but I refused to let them break me. Instead, I drew on every ounce of strength I had left. I'm not clinging to the past. I'm standing for justice, for the man who trusted me to carry out his wishes, for the family you've tried to destroy. My son's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't understand. We did what we had to do. You were holding us back." "Holding you back?" I echoed, disbelief and hurt mingling in my voice. "I gave everything to this family. I cared for your father when he was sick. I raised you with love and sacrifice. And now you say I'm holding you back." His wife stepped forward, her voice dripping with venom. "You're weak. You're a burden. We're building a future and you're just standing in the way." I looked at her, not with fear or anger, but with a calm dignity that surprised even me. "You may think you're building a future, but you're destroying everything that made this family strong. Love, respect, loyalty. Things you clearly don't understand." Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them away. This was not the time for weakness. This was the moment to stand tall, to reclaim my place. "I have the law on my side," I said quietly, my voice steady but filled with the weight of everything I had endured. "And the truth. The court has already ruled that the original will is valid, that the forged document is null and void. You have been cut out of the will." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of those words hanging thickly in the air, pressing down on everyone present. It was as if time itself paused, waiting for someone to break the stillness. My son's face paled, the bravado that had once shielded him crumbling before my eyes. His lips parted, but only a whisper escaped. "You can't do this," he murmured, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and desperation. "You're ruining everything." "No," I said firmly, my gaze unwavering. "You ruined it when you chose greed over family, when you betrayed your father's trust and your own mother's love." The words came from a place of deep sorrow, but also unshakable conviction. For a brief moment I saw a flicker in his eyes, perhaps remorse, or the faintest glimmer of the sun I once knew. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold defiance and hardened resolve. "You may have won this battle," he said bitterly, "but you haven't won the war." I shook my head slowly, a quiet strength rising within me. "There is no war here, only truth and justice, and I will protect what is rightfully mine and what my husband entrusted to me." The confrontation was painful, raw, and exhausting. But through it all, I held on to my strength and dignity. I refused to be broken by their cruelty or their lies. Later, as the legal papers were signed and the will officially restored, I felt a profound sense of closure wash over me. The symbolic moment when the forged will was declared invalid was not just a legal victory. It was a reclaiming of my identity, my rights, and my family's honor. Standing in the courtroom, I looked at my son and his wife one last time. They were no longer the family I had known, but I was no longer the woman they could dismiss or betray. I was a mother, a widow, and a fighter, and I had won. The courtroom battle was over. The forged will was invalidated, the original will restored, and my rightful place as executor reaffirmed. But as I stepped out of the courthouse into the soft afternoon light, I knew this victory was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where I would have to rebuild not just my home, but my heart. The house, once a place of conflict and cold silence, now felt like a sanctuary again. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching the familiar surfaces, the worn armchair where my husband used to sit, the wooden dining table where we shared countless meals, the shelves lined with books we both cherished. Each object held a memory, a fragment of the life we had built together. Now, those memories were mine to protect and cherish. In the quiet of the evening, I lit a candle in the living room. The soft flicker of the flame cast warm shadows on the walls, and I felt a gentle peace settle over me. It was as if my husband's presence was there with me, comforting and steady. I placed a framed photo of us on the mantelpiece, a symbol of enduring love and resilience. This simple act was more than decoration. It was a reclaiming of my identity, a declaration that I would no longer be pushed aside or forgotten. Sitting by the window, I opened it to let in the fresh air. The breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine from the garden, filling the room with life and hope. I breathed deeply, feeling the weight of grief lift just a little. The world outside was moving forward, and so would I. The road to healing was not easy. There were days when the loneliness pressed in, when memories cut sharply like knives, and when the absence of my husband was a hollow ache. But I learned to find strength in those moments, to honor my grief while refusing to be defined by it. Began to reconnect with old friends and neighbors, people who had stood by my husband and me through the years. Their kindness reminded me that I was not alone, that community and love still surrounded me. I also found solace in small routines, tending the garden, reading favorite books, and writing letters to my husband, as if speaking to him across the distance. Most importantly, I rediscovered my own voice. The woman who had once been silenced by betrayal and loss was now speaking up, standing tall and demanding respect. I realized that justice was not just about legal victories. It was about reclaiming dignity and self-worth. One afternoon, as I sat in the garden watching the sunlight dance on the leaves, I reflected on the journey I had taken, the pain of betrayal, the fight for truth, the strength I had found within. It all led to this moment of quiet triumph. I was no longer a victim of circumstance, but a survivor, a woman who had faced darkness and emerged stronger. To anyone watching this story, I want you to know this. No matter how deep the wounds, no matter how heavy the burden, you have the power to stand up for yourself. Justice is not always swift or easy, but it is worth fighting for. Your voice matters, your story matters, and you deserve to be heard. As I blew out the candle that night, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The flame may have gone out, but the light within me burned brighter than ever. I was ready to embrace the future with courage and grace, carrying the love of my husband and the strength of my own spirit forward. This is not just my story. It is a testament to the resilience of the human heart, the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity, and the enduring power of love and justice. Thank you for listening to me. If you loved my story, hit that subscribe button. Also comment "you story" in comment. I would love to hear from you. Once again, a big thanks to you.